Welcome to TPM Vid's Disney Beat, where we talk about all things Disney. If you're new to the channel and like what you see, hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video. You can also find us on all your favorite social media platforms. Expedition Everest is one of Disney World's most popular rides. It's a thrilling, immersive experience that follows the legend of the mythical Yeti. Ever since Expedition Everest opened in 2006, the Yeti has always been the star of the ride's finale. But he was no Disco Yeti. This massive, terrifying animatronic figure was an engineering marvel. No one had ever seen anything like it. But it quickly turned into a tragic tale, and the Yeti never moved again. Over the years, so many rumors have circulated about what happened. From foundations cracking to poor maintenance that caused the animatronic to fail, to even the figure being so powerful that it compromised the structural integrity and ripped itself apart. Deadpool even referenced the broken Yeti at this past D23. For almost 20 years, fans have wanted Disney to fix the Yeti. The rumor is that in order to actually fix it, the ride would need a lengthy closure and parts of the mountain would need to be removed. But what's the truth? What actually happened to the Yeti on Expedition Everest? Well, sit back because we are about to find out. On April 22, 2003, Expedition Everest was announced as the newest addition coming to Disney's Animal Kingdom. Construction actually began a month earlier in March, and over the course of 3 years, this new Disney mountain slowly took shape. At the time, Expedition Everest was the most expensive roller coaster ever built, coming in with a price tag of $100 million. It was a very complex structure that used 5,000 tons of steel to create 3 separate structures in the mountain. First, there's the coaster's track, which is a dynamic structure. It's always moving with the forces of the train. Then we have the actual rigid steel structure that forms the mountain, and finally the rigid support structure for the Yeti. Essentially, it's a 40-foot tower inside the mountain that supports this 4-ton animatronic. At the time, the Yeti was the most advanced animatronic figure Walt Disney Imagineering had ever created.
This Yeti is the single biggest dynamic figure that has ever been built. There is nothing that is this big, that moves this fast in the world of animation.
It stood 25 feet tall and had 19 separate functions that brought the character to life. Since 2006, Disney's animatronic technology has advanced quite a bit, but even by today's standards, the Yeti is still an impressive figure. Just look at how it moves. Due to the sheer scale alone, the Yeti could not be designed like a traditional animatronic. Usually for animatronics that stand upright, the mass and movements are anchored through their legs, but that's not the case with the Yeti. This animatronic required so much torque that they had to build a horizontal and vertical slide along with a boom that went into its back. The boom is what supported the entire figure. The metal slides would allow him to move 5 feet forwards and 18 inches up and down. The Yeti moved so fast that the force used to thrust the arm forward was equivalent to a 747 jet taking off. It was one powerful animatronic. This here was the full sequence programmed for the Yeti, which in total was only 9 seconds of animation. With the work lights on, you can see the boom behind the animatronic moving forwards and backwards. Just to get a better sense of the scale, this here is the actual coaster track, which looks tiny compared to the Yeti. On the ride, when you're flying through the scene at about 20 miles per hour, it would appear the Yeti's swipe just misses the train. Just listen to all those reactions. It was pretty terrifying, and it definitely added to the overall thrill of the ride.
In the shadows of Mount Everest, a train awaits. But be warned, those attempting to reach the summit must face him.
Previews for Expedition Everest began in January of 2006, with an official opening date set for April 22nd. This gave park operations 3 months to work out all the kinks, ensuring it was ready for opening day. Like with any new ride, there were some issues that needed to be worked out, one being the Yeti. In a Jim Hill article from February 2006, some of his insiders told him the Yeti broke down. This was the first documented instance I could find, and instead of closing the entire ride, they just placed him in B mode. Well, at the time, this would have technically been B2 mode. A mode was the full range of motion, B1 was limited motion of the head and hand along with glowing red eyes and the strobe light, then B2 was no motion with fans and strobe lights only. Today we know this one as the infamous B-mode Disco Yeti. Now, thankfully, this first malfunction was addressed within a few days, but the Yeti became a perpetual problem. On the WDW Magic forums, there was an Expedition Everest Effects status watch thread that was started in April of 2007. I vividly remember reading this thread when I was a kid. I was so enamored with the Yeti and this whole situation, especially after seeing the Expedition Everest segments in those TV documentaries. So recently, I went back through that thread to draw up a timeline of when exactly the Yeti stopped working. Now I present to you the Expedition Everest Yeti timeline. So, from April of 2006 till about August 2007, the Yeti was sporadically running between A and B mode. For a majority of the time, it was in A mode, but come September 2007, it switched into B mode for about 2 months. In November 2007, the Yeti returned to A mode in preparation for the executives from Tokyo Disneyland who were coming to visit Walt Disney World. The Yeti remained in A mode until the beginning of February 2008, and then after about a month hiatus in B mode, he was back in A mode from March until about mid-June 2008. From what I gathered, June 15th was the very last time the Yeti was ever seen in A mode. It's been a disco ever since. At this point, no one really knew what was happening, but this is where the rumors begin. It was said that the animatronic put so much stress on the supports that it cracked the concrete foundation, and in order to fix the animatronic, parts of the mountain would have to be removed. I scoured through so many message boards on multiple websites trying to get to the bottom of it, and what I found was that the first mentions of cracked foundation in 2008 all had the source of information being an attractions cast member. Now, once a rumor starts in the Disney community, well, it just spreads like wildfire. And this fire spread for years. Every time you heard about the Yeti, there was always mention of a cracked foundation. I mean, these are even things that I believed for the longest time. But all along, insiders were telling us the real reason. We just refused to listen. The Yeti was a massive and very powerful animatronic. Remember, the amount of force used to thrust the arm forward was equivalent to the force of a 747 taking off.
If you took his arm off and looked at it and looked at his forearm truss section, you would think you were looking at a NASCAR or a F1 car without its body.
Well, during testing, Imagineers realized there was a lot of stress put on the animatronic's shoulder and arm. This was a flaw that came up early on, and it's always been one of the main issues with the Yeti. Essentially, the rods and pistons inside the animatronic couldn't withstand the amount of force caused by the Yeti's swinging arm motion. The animatronic was too powerful for its own good. Force equals mass times acceleration, right? So increased acceleration of a 4-ton animatronic means an increase in the amount of force. On average, Expedition Everest dispatches 1 train every minute. This means, over the course of an hour, the Yeti would swing his arm 60 times. Over a 10-hour day, this would be 600 times. With the shoulder under such high stress as it was, if that motor seized or if the bearing wore out, which apparently it did, this meant stress would be redistributed to other parts of the animatronic, including the mechanical sled behind it. More stress on other parts of the figure meant the potential for even more failures. This could have resulted in pieces of the animatronic literally coming loose and potentially falling onto the ride path. Marnie 1971, trusted insider on the WDW Magic forums, had always stated the issue was with the animatronic itself. This work-light footage of the Yeti was titled Pre-Shoulder Rebuild and was dated June 18, 2008. The last time A-mode was documented on WDW Magic was on June 15th. The timelines match up perfectly, and this title card confirms that there was an issue with the animatronic's shoulder. I'm not sure if the shoulder rebuild actually happened though. I'm leaning towards it didn't, but if it did, it clearly wasn't enough to fix the Yeti. In 2006, Jim Hill Media heard from his sources that the Yeti would require a lot of maintenance that would help mitigate the issues discovered during previews. We're talking nightly maintenance, and one of the other longtime rumors was that the Yeti never received the proper maintenance, which eventually led to its failure. From a 2016 post on WDW Magic, there was a user that participated in the Lunch with an Imagineer program that used to be at Disney's Hollywood Studios. It just so happened that a mechanical engineer for show quality was at that lunch. When asked about the Yeti, he mentioned that the issues were flaws in the original design calculations and the inability to perform proper maintenance. He mentioned there was unanticipated stress in parts of the animatronic due to the lack of maintenance in other parts. This all made a lot of sense. Well, that was until 2020 when Disney legend and former Imagineer Joe Rohde had a different take on the maintenance rumor. He said it was never an issue of maintenance access, and that Walt Disney World maintenance was actually part of the design team. It was a set of unforeseen issues that came up. Now, notice how Rohde said maintenance access and not the ability to perform proper maintenance? He acknowledged there was access for maintenance, which there obviously would be, but not that it was easily accessible. Just think about it. As an Imagineer who at the time was still employed by Disney, Joe Rohde would never publicly blame the maintenance team at Animal Kingdom. It just wouldn't happen. He essentially just takes the fall. What was never mentioned by any reputable source though was a cracked foundation. Likely what got misconstrued was that if the animatronic continued to operate in A-mode and put unforeseen stress on parts of the figure, this could likely crack the animatronic or the substructure behind it. This 2010 article from the Orlando Sentinel was the first time Disney publicly acknowledged that the Yeti was no longer working like it was designed. The Disney spokesperson went on to say that the Yeti is a complicated audio animatronic figure. The complex functions presented some challenges affecting its operation. We purposely took measures in 2008 to reduce unnecessary stress and preserve many of its functions while we studied the possible long-term solutions. The Yeti was a literal beast, and as impressive as it was, the animatronic itself has always been the problem. Expedition Everest stands 199.5 feet tall, and that Yeti is nestled right inside the mountain. For years, there have been rumors that in order to repair and fix the Yeti, parts of the mountain would need to be removed. What you don't realize is that the scene with the Yeti is closer to ground level than you think. It's not suspended 180 feet in the mountain. It's more like 20 to 30 feet from ground level. This is where you enter the mountain for the finale, and then the train curves downwards to the right. This would place the Yeti right around this area towards the middle to back of the mountain. The Yeti was installed around October of 2005, well after the track and the mountain structure were completed. So getting him out would be the same way he came in. Just below and behind the animatronic is a huge maintenance area, so they would take him apart and wheel him out the back through one of the service doors. Plus, insiders have reported that overnight, the Yeti has been removed at least once. So the rumor that parts of the mountain would need to be removed to fix the Yeti is not true, and it was even confirmed by Joe Rohde himself. Now, speaking of Joe Rohde, during a panel at D23 in 2013, he publicly addressed fixing the Yeti, and this is what he had to say.
You have to understand, it's a giant, complicated machine sitting on top of like a 46-foot tall tower in the middle of a finished building. But we are working on it, and we continue to work on it. We have tried several things. None of them quite get to the key turning of the 40-foot tower inside of a finished building, but we are working on it, and I will fix the Yeti someday, I swear.
Around this time, people documented seeing the Yeti in different B-mode positions, so something was definitely being done behind the scenes. A lot of us even thought they'd fix the Yeti once Pandora opened in 2017, but that never happened either. In 2017, Disney did, however, run B-mode with the A-mode show lighting, but that didn't last too long. The Yeti was much more visible, but it was very obvious he wasn't moving. In 2018, Joe Rohde confirmed once again that he was still working on fixing the Yeti, which gave us hope, but that all died a few years later. In November of 2020, Joe Rohde announced his retirement from Walt Disney Imagineering. Rohde was the mastermind behind Expedition Everest, and he was the one championing for the Yeti to get fixed. So why did it get to a point where 14 years passed and there was still no solution? Well, the big issue is essentially politics and finances. It boils down to who would foot the bill, Walt Disney Imagineering or Park Operations. Under the Walt Disney Company, these are two separate subsidiaries. So with attractions in the park, the company Walt Disney World Resort hires Walt Disney Imagineering to develop and build the attraction. Once everything is completed, Imagineering turns the ride over to Park Operations, and it's now the property of Walt Disney World. With the Yeti on Expedition Everest, Park Operations could argue that Imagineering delivered a faulty product and didn't do the due diligence during the design phase. Then Walt Disney Imagineering could argue that Walt Disney World maintenance teams didn't properly maintain the figure. For 14 years, it's been a perpetual tug-of-war that may never have an end. So the question that remains is, will the Yeti ever be fixed? Well, in June of 2023, the now retired Joe Rohde gave even more insight into the matter. He said the issue is a complex interface between finance, operations, marketing, design, timing, engineering, narrative, and guest satisfaction. All of these need to line up to make a viable solution. There are solutions, there are not opportunities. Now that Rohde was no longer employed by Imagineering, there seemed to be a bit more candid honesty. Finance was his first point, and honestly, that's what it comes down to in the end. Who will pay for it, and will the return on investment be worth it? I mean, Expedition Everest is still one of the most popular rides at Walt Disney World, even with a broken Yeti. I could see Park Operations thinking that spending the money to fix 9 seconds of a 3-minute ride isn't worth it. I would argue, though, that the near miss of the Yeti swipe are some of the most impactful 9 seconds of the ride. The entire experience builds up to this moment, coming face to face with the Yeti, and then there he is. For years, insiders have even said some of the solutions don't even involve the ride closing. Now, even if that wasn't the case, there was already a perfect opportunity to fix the Yeti in 2022, but they didn't take it. After 16 years of operation, Expedition Everest went down for its first ever refurbishment. It lasted 3 months, but Rohde said it himself though. There are solutions, but it's just a matter of having an opportunity to put one of those solutions into action. At this point, a fixed Yeti is probably not looking good. Even if Walt Disney World takes the blame and funds the Yeti project, a lot of Animal Kingdom's budget is already tied up with Tropical Americas. Who knows, as a newly appointed Disney legend, maybe Joe Rohde will still keep his promise and
Fix the Yeti someday, I swear.
It has been said that recently he's been back at Imagineering doing some consulting. I mean, only time will tell, but unless a miracle happens, Disco Yeti will probably be with us forever. So what are your opinions on this whole debacle with the Yeti? Do you think it'll be fixed? I'd love to know. Leave a comment down below to start a conversation, and don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video.